Chom den den jan be yong la sha zo lo kong ge lu de dim nye den de nye da ran nam da ra sa ra ve chi nye den ge je je zai se re nye je tu gra le hong ze kong da si be zhen ra ma re men tam du nge che ze ve ro zo kong la pu je da ze yin lai tu ju yong den song Rudra che do nyamo nyeno le je cha do ndo ze shen ma re me zre dung ra nyu go che nye che ze ra je nam de ne ta je sa je tar se yen den bu so ye se tu go chun ra ju dan ju nye jen de da le me zhen jam be yong la du Zedin cheje chenra ubezreje dale temo mambara srane Kadan tenje jonglo topa ye zodre pot non wa sa tu so Kangi tenje re wanjang gaba me ba je me pa che ba me pa ta me pa hong me pa ro me Tade deme den jeme debanye jeshden be zobu sanje nanam je tamba de la sa za lo zarb gundu si je thani le tamge sam sha yong zong shi chang jim him be lam ken karma ba mi she de be ji wu zu ge du la so de ne nan ta a chwa de tong bo ling pyu gi
So we will start with the questions that came in. The first is as follows. It concerns verse 27, and the person asking the question writes, Khenpo Rinpoche explained that the way to enlightenment would be, for example, different from applying to a job. At the job interview, others decide if you get the job or not. Reaching the enlightened state depends on you alone. My question concerns karma. Don't you need other people who help you on your path on the way to enlightenment? Teachers, Dharma friends, teachings, etc. So the question, if I've understood it right, is that there is the dependency on one's own karma. Det är kännsånge.
Det är kolla med kolla direkt.
Där det läka chik tog godu. Den är läka triken rangla triva trigger va?
Yes yes. Den jong kos.
La så tenne sangi kopang togi yöme rang chikpo la ra lägre. Känn la ra lägre men då som. Tenne
Sholoka kan ni tsab den där det är så.
Ni tsab den. Tenne rang chikpo la ralegi mepa sonne chiktrengen du se mide. Kan resna så gille la tenne mareve. Inile de rang gille va. Kan det
det är Sholoka det kan det är så gott.
Det är
Yes, it's up so.
Yes. Give långt dupei Jansella. Nöche tanke rinchen tredamsun. Det cher kunla känre med paji så på gång på Jansella.
Halleluja. Lasso ta di insar ko chen be Tuan Angsate, Nankin take Jimbe, and Cancer, Zepe Parsina, Tuat Nahi Badasams. Tene, Petiche do can't shoe you may Tringimin do. Yin a young Shanchu Drupala, Jutsun Gomare Sejum, Peche Hu Jumare something. Shanchu Drupala, Jut Tang, Jin, Tenzo Gogyot. Tama Duviete, Rancone du Gogre Mato, Duro Chinkeropa Yinda, Yungumarwa. Penna lay in Nayang, so circus lay mato, me Yindake.
So the question is asked in the context of the practice of patience, as set forth in verse number 27 or the 27th of the 37 practices of a Bodhisattva. Now, Khenpo Rinpoche did say yes, that whether an individual attains enlightenment or not depends upon the individual alone. Enlightenment can't be given to you as a gift or it's also not the case that other people can do some of the effort for you, the effort or efforts with the aim of attaining enlightenment. This is something the individual practitioner must do himself. Of course, in terms of the individual practitioner's situation, there is the perspective of causes and conditions conducive to attaining enlightenment, and that the practitioner needs to have the right causes and conditions for making efforts on the path to enlightenment. So the right causes and conditions do play a role. However, whether you have the right causes or conditions, whether you have the right causes and conditions or not, depends upon your karma, yes. However, your personal karma is your own. It's not, again, as if someone can add something to your personal karma, something which would make it easier for you to attain enlightenment. Influence of that type or kind isn't possible at all. So that's what's meant here. And in terms of karma that you have accumulated throughout innumerable rebirths, the predispositions that result from previous actions are your own creations. It's not as if someone did something in your name with the consequence of you having to take the consequences. Karma is about you having engaged in specific actions, and the fact that later on, you yourself will experience the consequences of those actions. So even though in terms of the path to enlightenment, certain causes and conditions are necessary for the efforts to be successful, as it were, it all, whether you have these causes and conditions or not, depends on the predispositions you've accumulated on the basis of your own past actions. So karma is not external to yourself, as it were.
Penna Thakur Rinpoche damjik jön yobre. Tharba drupala jun deshin himbote chebre. Tharba jute deshin himboro.
The primary cause which allows any sentient being to attain enlightenment is the so-called Tathagata heart, the Buddha within, a reference to mind's true nature, ever present within. And one of the founding fathers of the Kagyu school of Tibetan Buddhism, Gampopa, gave a short answer to your question by saying the primary cause for attaining enlightenment is the Tathagata heart.
Tendeg deshin nimbote suchik tang tamundo chö mare charan rang tamung mai be chö jiro.
And the Tathagata heart within is, as it were, entirely your own. It hasn't been given to you by someone, by an external person or entity of sorts, nor is it the result of efforts of any kind. It's the ever presence of mind's true nature, also called the Tathagata heart.
That knows some of the Nesem Chuni, the Nesuchi research here, Yomarwa.
The true nature of your own mind, you cannot share this with others. It's not the case that you can sort of give away part of it or entirely. It's simply not possible. The true nature of your own mind exists within, and it's entirely yours, as it were. It's an individual phenomenon. It's not something that you can share with others.
Oh yeah, that the tarbe jungomate rang semdredoa.
So the primary cause which allows anyone to attain Buddha, the enlightened state, is the Tathagata heart, which, if one were to put it into legal terms, is individual property. It's not shared with others.
Yeah, I need but a tawaram a carson or sona. Jen gave a shin in song.
La?
Jen.
Then you have circumstances or conditions which would make it possible for you to engage in the kind of training which can result in progress on the path to enlightenment. And an example of such a condition or circumstance would be the spiritual guide, the spiritual friend. And in terms of the spiritual friend, there needs to be specific merits or qualities of his which make for him being an authentic spiritual friend. For example, if we go back to the example of a job interview, your prospective employer will go through your CV to see if you have the education, knowledge, experience, merits, and so on, which would make for you being a good employer in the field you're applying for. So it's the same. A so-called spiritual friend needs to have certain qualities, a certain level of knowledge and a certain level of experience and so on and so forth, in order to qualify as an authentic spiritual friend.
Yeah, that's in the Gavin, Tamnate, Damayan said. Tap. Tapti, that Jin Gavin, Tuna and Pinkamare, could them but Damaji go.
Now, the presence of an authentic spiritual friend alone isn't sufficient. There also has to be the instructions or the advice or the guidance given by the authentic spiritual friend to the disciple.
Yeah, that Dhamma Yevate Yamslinking Are Mato Yindani Rosu Yomaro.
Now, in terms of the advice, the instructions, and so on, the only way to make them work in terms of the disciple is that the disciple properly practices or uses the instructions. Just having heard instructions but not use them will again not make for progress on the path. And in terms of those efforts, it's the practitioner, the individual practitioner himself, who has to make the efforts for the instructions to work. No one can do that for him.
The direct get so much done. Tar tuna, tarbat rank drubier him at all. Jinky could draw change shit up come into her.
So, in the end, whether you attain enlightenment or not depends upon yourself. Of course, you have the causes and conditions described in brief, and these are necessary. However, in the end, it is up to the individual practitioner whether he makes good use of the spiritual friend at hand and his instructions or not. So the mere presence of these causes and conditions will not bring about your enlightenment. Whether your enlightenment is achieved or not depends on how you use or how you relate to these causes and conditions.
The in this song ngama nge lega kan she yu me te dan de lyn del de dan jarang ha ko bre song sanjek.
Buddha Shakyamuni said, Drangi Lü Latana.
Ben tanda lü de la tönjins yapo top de jong ma le zang bol ten song re song.
Da Lü Rang marva Lü dan Lü.
Lü sim kan. De ben mi chi le lü le pe mi chi bo yuen ya sam le chi bo me me ten de yong ge do.
In terms of karma also, consider the following, and here Buddha Shakyamuni said the following, in terms of considering personal karma. Look at yourself, the situation of your physical body and of your mind, and you can sort of figure out what type of actions, to some extent, you have engaged in previous lifetimes. It's not as if all sentient beings with a body and a mind have the same situation. Some may be very healthy, for example, but unhappy. So even though the physical body is in a good situation, mentally the individual isn't, and so on and so forth. And the present circumstances are the creations, as it were, of my own previous actions. It's something that I myself have brought about. It's not something brought upon me by others. My present circumstances are not brought about by others. These are the results of my own previous actions. And then one can also sort of figure out, if one takes a good look at oneself and how one thinks and acts, in which direction one is heading as to a future rebirth. In order to figure that out, Buddha Shakyamuni said, look at how you act in the present. That will be a good indication of your future rebirth or rebirths. And that indication as well is an individual or personal thing. It's your behavioral pattern, the way you think, and so on. It's all about your own personal actions expressed in behavior, in speech, relationships, and so on. So what Khenpo Rinpoche said last time is that in terms of attaining liberation from samsara or endless rebirths in various worldly existences, it's not that you don't need good circumstances or the right causes and circumstances. These play a role. However, whether you have these causes and circumstances or not depend upon the nature of your past actions. and in terms of using the right causes and circumstances, when you have them, that also hinges upon your own individual efforts. So, in the end, it's really just the person or the individual practitioner who can bring about his own enlightenment.
Pe this pe khatu song za nge de hu ne hu bi per na nga zoom je bu ji go na ro wa tyo ma zeba gam ko re ma tho ta se de le thön jin kan de ji yo na ya pe min je bu ji so tu ma ro wa.
Now, that what was explained last time, the fact that it was explained in the context of patients gone to the other shore, happened simply because there was the mentioning of various benefits that come from practicing patients gone to the other shore. Such as, during the last teaching, Khenpo Rinpoche having explained that if a person would want to have a pleasant appearance in his next rebirth, then he needs to practice this kind of patience, because this is one of the many results that come from practicing patience gone to the other shore. Think of a person who perhaps doesn't have an attractive appearance in this life, and the fact that no matter what this person does, he can't really change that fact. It is the fact that he can't change this hinges on that his unpleasant appearance results from his own previous actions, and you can't, as it were, just divorce yourself from the consequences of your past actions. It's not that simple.
This should do.
Yes.
Operation chain.
Yeah. Well, now, many of you in today's world may think, oh, well, you can actually do something. In today's world, we have cosmetic surgery.
Tende surgery well,
you see, yes, you may make corrections as to your appearance by way of cosmetic surgery. However, it's an artificial thing. It's not that you were born with the appearance that you now have, having had cosmetic surgery. It is an intervention by you in order to correct your appearance, your physical appearance. So it's not really authentic, as it were. It's not really your appearance. It's a made-up appearance.
That the devil
Then we'll go on with question number 2. which is, I was with the Theravada tradition for many years and noticed that they observe much more strict the ethic discipline or the discipline of Buddhist ethics than in Tibetan Buddhist orders. For example, the Theravada practitioners do not consume alcohol at all, but I notice that this is not the same for Tibetan Buddhists, where drinking alcohol is considered to be okay, as long as one doesn't get drunk too often. Well, someone must have told this person that. Similarly, in terms of sexual misconduct, the interpretation of which is much more strict in Theravada. Some say that a Bodhisattva does not have to observe those strict ethic rules because he's not afraid of samsara. Oh dear. As the Theravada practitioners are. So my question is, how strict are these rules in your opinion? And then there is a second question by the same person. Since birth in realms other than the realms of animals and humans isn't based on, intercourse between the future parents, and that there therefore isn't any opportunity for sexual misconduct. Do the individuals in these other realms, da yida dangyalwa nirava, tene la de kemen kyogani nyampo dene kijumidu tsuntulgi keva sondishik rededu tene de du pådang mågi geva göra veden såla. Det kända det digingongi.
Nej, det alla måste kocha.
Ja.
Ta det la. Trovate.
We'll start with the first question.
Chetang kunche thone. Ta Theravada ge kunche sonye tang tene phebege nangchög nang na kunche ni de tsongdur shune te pheba de kuyongwe so de tang Theravada de kutobe so de chwach nang do. Ta de inju de depends rang ju la damba khanda khang yeme la ra le yungar.
Well, if one takes a general look at conduct in Theravada Buddhism and compares that with conduct or a code of ethics in Tibetan Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism then seen as more strict and Tibetan Buddhism as sort of relaxed. One can't really make that comparison because in terms of either tradition, Theravada Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism, however, Theravada Buddhism is part of Tibetan Buddhism. Well, I don't know. It all depends upon which of the many codes of ethics that there are the individual practitioner has committed to. So the conduct of practitioners in both Theravada Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism, the conduct of the individual practitioners depends upon whether, or rather depends upon if the individual practitioner one is looking at has committed to just upholding a single vow or a number of vows, or a single code of ethic with just a few vows, or another single code of ethics with many more vows. So in both traditions there is a great variation in terms of the choices practitioners make as to committing to an extensive code of ethics or one which isn't very extensive, which includes just a few or just a single vow. Now, in terms of so-called householder practitioners, being the practitioner who does not enter a monastic way of life, the code of ethics here is not very extensive. It includes a few vows. So if we take the code of ethics, the complete code of ethics of a so-called householder, sometimes referred to as a lay practitioner, you have a set number of vows as to this code of ethics, and the individual practitioner can choose to commit to 1, 2, 3, or all vows included in this code of ethics. And in terms of a householder practitioner who has committed to the entire code of ethics, the practitioner does not drink alcohol, whether he practices Theravada Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism. It's the same. The vows are the same. So it depends on which vows the practitioner has committed to. But the householder code of ethics is the same in Theravada Buddhism and in Tibetan Buddhism. So a person in Tibet, a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism, who has committed to the entire set of vows of a householder who practices Tibetan Buddhism, does not drink alcohol at all. It's taught in Tibetan Buddhism that this rule is to, or this vow is to be upheld strictly. It's not as if you can do social drinking because otherwise other people will feel uncomfortable or whatever. There are sometimes mentioning of reasons like this. No. The Code of Ethics says if you have committed to this vow, you're not to drink alcohol at all.
Then social gathering that glass rates 통고 계기 요나 대 통만 라마를 너무 쇼고.
Now, it appears that some who have committed to this code of ethics feel a need for sometimes to bend the rules a bit. And the example just mentioned is one where people say that, well, in social gatherings, I will be regarded as odd if I do not even drink a glass or two. So could I do that? The answer is no, you can't. And if in your judgment there is a situation where you feel that you would have to agree to drink a glass or two, you would, prior to going to the social gathering, have to consult your spiritual friend and ask for permission to drink one glass at that one occasion. Whether your spiritual guide will give the permission or not is another question. That's not the point here. The point is that you as a practitioner would have to do that. Otherwise, you would be acting in a way which damages your practice of the code of ethics you've committed to. You would be breaking the vow to not drink alcohol hadn't you been granted that permission.
Penna Peben Begi Chongtongyate Lepo Ravjendo Samgi Are Mongboki. De Jadani Yulki Netan Tene de Mongo Yungi. Tanda Tapena Perlo Judavich, Perlo Tang, Teneta, Ronsamka, like a Sikkim dog. Denzola, alcohol tissue, you heard it. The color of which cigarette, Tendeka Tungo Kegindu, then a Matang Tammy Chab those should do, Lamatsu Garrison with Dosena, Chung Nupa Mevas, Tongo Ya Chung Goose, the net Tongo Kenato Ton and Jiggres on a Jadang, Young Chongan on the Chushu Chambu Jane, Patena Chongan number in Mato.
Now, there are situations in terms of householder practitioners for people who lead a monastic way of life. Those situations wouldn't occur very much, if at all, in that one lives in a monastery and doesn't really partake in social gatherings where people drink alcohol and the like. So for householder practitioners, in the context of Tibetan Buddhism, Khenpo Rinpoche explains, well, there are areas in terms of old Tibet and today's Tibet too, as well as parts of the countries that border with Tibet, north of India, Bhutan and the like, where in some regions of those countries it's quite common to have a bit of alcohol with one's meal even. Now in Europe we could look at Italy or France, wine-growing countries where there is this culture at large. Now in areas, in the Himalayan areas, for example, South Tibet, there would be this type of culture too, Then you have Himalayan regions such as the Indian state Sikkim and other areas like that, where the same applies. Their spiritual guides, lamas, who have been approached by householder practitioners regarding the issue discussed here, those spiritual guides, those lamas, very often give the following advice. Now, if you feel that you have to have a glass with the rest of the people at your social gathering, then see to that the alcohol that you are going to drink, you can organize that with the person who gives the social gathering or someone else there, that before your glass of alcohol is served to you, that it's boiled so that the alcohol effect, as it were, in terms of getting drunk, evaporates. And then you're served a glass of boiled alcohol that's cooled down, and because of it having been boiled, won't make you drunk. Or you organize that you're served a glass with a bit of alcohol diluted with water. You make sure before you're served your glass that the glass of liquid you're drinking is not going to intoxicate you. That's usually how one, when approaching a spiritual guide of these areas, is told to conduct oneself in terms of, as it were, bending the rules. One must not become intoxicated, which means you have to either dilute the alcohol in your glass with water or have it boiled for you in advance.
Teniyan kashiye 다 종콜 거래. 내 속창리 통샤는 저기에서는 통도가 대 너무 요 말해. 땡땡 교토는 너무 요 말해.
Then, in terms of those, which is the case very often in Tibetan Buddhism, who engage in various practices of the Buddhist tantras, there is a gathering, the gathering of group practice called loosely ritual feast, where where in terms of offerings being made, there is the offering of alcohol, and then you have offerings of fruits, cakes, many things. You're probably, those of you who practice Tibetan Buddhism, familiar with this type of group practice. Now, some, it seems, have taken or have adopted a personal opinion, the following, namely that on those occasions, as the offerings later on are distributed among the participants of the ritual feast, it is permissible to drink the alcohol, one glass after the other. However, not according to the rules of conduct in the context of a ritual feast, that isn't permitted.
속나는 총대 야네 간대지 고기였으나 통초부 뒤set 데 뒤질 줄투나 다 뒤질 통초부로
in terms of the Tibetan Buddhist tantras, the Buddhist tantras, it is not the Buddhist tantras are not, they are, I should rather have said, practiced in Tibetan Buddhism very often. There is the offering of alcohol, and in terms of so-called ritual feasts, there is, as it were, an infrastructure as to how everything is done. And in terms of the presence of alcohol, a practitioner of the Buddhist Tantras who has made progress to the extent where his mind is not intoxicated when drinking alcohol, meaning that the practitioner in question has developed to the point of a level of realization which allows him to transform the otherwise intoxicated state so that intoxication doesn't happen. A practitioner who has achieved that level is allowed to drink alcohol during a ritual feast. If one is a practitioner who has not yet developed to that extent, one is not permitted to drink the alcohol.
달래잖아 아메리카 송교 요살에 때 카투 카르코해 영에 메시 헐 수주드 두시 세줄도와 두 생켄데 간 고고요르스나 당정이 당뇨몬 고고요
dansin nyönmon tene
시 생켄데 된 잠시게 메라우지로 고고요.
So in terms of the name used for alcohol being one of the offerings at a ritual feast, its Tibetan name is Dutsi. Sanskrit name is Amrita, loosely often translated into English as nectar. However, if we look at the Tibetan translation of the Sanskrit word Amrita, you have a compound here made up of two words, du and tsi, combined into one word. Du is a reference to the notion of a self, as well as of afflictive obscuring states. Tsi is a reference to an antidote for the notion of a self and afflictive obscuring states. So, in terms of the practitioner and his level of realization, we're looking at someone who is able to cancel out an intoxicated mindset resulting from having drunk alcohol, in that his level of realization or his mindset has to a great extent realized no self, and therefore afflictive obscuring states do not occur. And even though drinking alcohol, the usual effect of intoxication therefore does not happen.
Penna Tindeg Dutch the Yondu Lusim Nika Tene Yajetang to which Gogi. Penna Lula Nemungo Yongye Set Tonton Chai and the Zokanga Sawatuna Yomon ten Yongurba.
Now, if we look at Dutsi or Amrita or Nectar, in the context of the body and the mind, we can look at the physical body to begin with. And here the view is the following, namely that disease, a short lifespan and the like result primarily from afflictive obscuring states. It's those states that cause disease, that make for a short lifespan and the like. So, when partaking of Dutsi or Amrita, nectar, the effect is the opposite of the effect just described, namely the counteracting of disease, the counteracting of a short lifespan and the like.
Dancing le tenne rawan me ba khorwa la ngan thi ro do wa
rangong me pa
khorwa la thi ro do wa dancing tene ta shin la pe je te ke dancing nu pa cham ne to pa dancing ki nu pa cham ne tokpa compared to tang.
Then you have the mindset, and in terms of the world, or the mindset of worldly individuals, there the notion of the self, of a self, is predominant, with all its consequences, with all the consequences of that notion. And because of the notion of a self, the individual helplessly continues to wander from one rebirth to the next in worldly existences, and liberation from an endless rebirth in worldly existences is nowhere at hand. Now, in terms of so-called Dutsi, Amrita, nectar perhaps in English, what is at hand here is the mindset of a practitioner whose spiritual influence in terms of enlightenment is such that he's able to transform the nature of the substance at hand, in this case alcohol, so that it, instead of producing intoxication, makes for counteracting the notion of a self, thus counteracting disease, a short lifespan, and so on.
Jamden dege duchi yuan ji gu sen halebe ke songhang ge non yu dem chembo.
Now, in terms of the Buddhist tantras originating with Buddha Shakyamuni, there is parts of certain tantras and entire tantras devoted to explanations of these extraordinary qualities that can occur in the context of so-called Dützi, Amrita in Sanskrit. And in terms of Dützi, it's not always a question of an intoxicating substance such as alcohol being transformed by way of a practitioner's realization, so that ill effects do not occur. You also have sacred substances that have the same effect, that are produced according to certain guidelines and so on. Yeah, popularly known as Dharma medicine. However, whatever the name used, what should be at hand is so-called Dützi, Amrita in Sanskrit. So a substance which counteracts the otherwise ill effects of something. And so when an authentic so-called Vajra holder engages in the practices whereby these substances are made, very often these practices and the rituals associated with them are accompanied by signs indicating the extraordinary quality of the Dützi or Amrita that has been produced. Now, if we look at modern day science, there it will probably be the case for people in that field of knowledge to accept what was just explained. Now there is a lot of further explanations here, but we won't have time to go into that. Then there is the sexual misconduct part of the question.
Dandam chongchu sim yu le jebe gongsa chi la song te. Dandam chongchu sim yu le jebe gongsa chi ge me sang ta phyme chi thi ba yin na shong po yin na mo yin na pu chi thi ba yin na. Konson de sha wang zan thi gyo man de sha rang yin me par to cha.
Then there was the sexual misconduct question, and we then have Tibetan Buddhism and the path of a Bodhisattva. However, keep in mind that the path of a Bodhisattva isn't restricted to Tibetan Buddhism at all, alone. It is associated with Tibetan Buddhism, but not Tibetan Buddhism alone. There are many Mahayana Buddhist countries. Now, here, in terms of a person who asked the question here, let me see. This person had been told that sexual misconduct, whatever type of misconduct that would involve, is not mentioned. Let me see. Is sort of okay, it seems, because as a practitioner, someone has told this person of Tibetan Buddhism, things are different. Theravada Buddhists, this person has been told, are afraid of samsara and therefore do not engage in sex. Yeah, that's an opinion apparently voiced by someone. You see, in terms of the path of a bodhisattva, as has been explained throughout the course, the so-called Bodhi mind has two perspectives, relative and absolute. And in terms of the absolute perspective, a bodhisattva who has realized absolute bodhicitta, the absolute perspective of the Bodhi mind, would or is a person who has freed himself of the notion of a self, an individual self. If that person were to engage in sexual intercourse, it means that this person knows the nature of that event, its illusion-like nature, its emptiness, its essencelessness, which points to that this person would not be engaging in a sexual act the way a person who has not realized absolute bodhicitta would do, namely because of seeking the temporary pleasure of the sexual act, pointing to the mindset of the worldly person being a mindset of attachment, pleasure seeking, and the like. Tenphel?
Yeah. The interco
Therefore, in the case of the realized bodhisattva, the purpose of the sexual act would be a purpose in the context of benefiting one or many other people.
초절은 내배 성집 선바지나
Perna.
인던 중에 주라고.
Re inede kände kan du jonge re mi chikla de.
다 인던 용거로.
Jonge re te pe chiksona.
perna 다 인던도 성집 선바 동남지 시주를 제와 지게 perna 다 동남지 시주를 제와 야루지게 좀 샤. tele se shung ju samba che thong tene jankam the la chö zu tende ge namtar mangbo yor ba.
For example, and in the Buddhist scriptures you find instances where the purpose of a bodhisattva has been a purpose of this kind. For example, there may be, or there has been in the past, a person who leads a country, such as a king, which would apply to past times, where royal households ruled specific countries. If we take the example of a household where the king were a Buddhist practitioner who had attained a realization of no self, meaning he had attained the first of the 10 Bodhisattva bhumis, or any of the bhumis above the first, but minimum the first. He would be a Bodhisattva who has a realization of the essencelessness of all things. Now, he may, because of the welfare of the subjects of his country, take a queen, marry, because he knows, by way of his realization, that the result of sexual intercourse with his queen would result in a child who would have the same inclinations as his father, and who would therefore also practice to become a great bodhisattva. And when this son would in the future ascend to the throne, that would secure the welfare of the subjects of the people in that country. So, by way of marrying and by way of having sexual intercourse with his queen, many would be benefited. So, in that sort of situation, this kind of bodhisattva would engage in sexual intercourse. However, he wouldn't be, the driving force in him doing so wouldn't be pleasure seeking and attachment to worldly pleasures and so on. It would be for the sake of securing the future welfare of the people of his country. So, in those instances, sexual intercourse is not seen as a non-virtue as to Tibetan Buddhism.
And
then in the Buddhist Tantras, there is the mention of a consort to the realized individual.
Consort in a tap Songyam say and the Zoho. When a Tana Lamate, Desha Lone, Jasha was Zawan in the Mare.
And in the case of realized so-called Vajra holders, it's not a question of worldly pleasure seeking in terms of sexual actions. It's for a greater purpose, a purpose where many will be benefited because of having taken a consort, that this is done.
반디 소임 샤야 그 거르데 망보 직 송마 마주근하는 용게야.
Now you have different categories of tantras. One category is named Mother Tantra, and it's in specific in this category of Buddhist tantras that the details of purpose and the like in taking a consort are explained.
And
the Hebadra Tantra is very extensive in this regard. Also, the Chakrasambhara Tantra is extensive in this regard in terms of the explanations of this. Khenpo Rinpoche, as he is a Khenpo, has studied and practiced extensively, and he has received transmissions and the like of both these tantras, and nowhere in these tantras is there a single word referring to that sexual action in a worldly context is permitted. Ordinary worldly sexual actions are actions, it says in both these tantras, originating with, or the driving force is pleasure seeking, originating with attachment to pleasure, and if that occurs in terms of practitioners of those tantras, it means that those practitioners who fall prey to such pleasure seeking have transgressed, have broken their samaya. So whatever one finds within the Buddhist tantras in this context has to be put into its right perspective, the perspective of various practices in relation to various levels of realization on the path to enlightenment. It's never about pleasure seeking, originating with attachment, an afflictive, obscuring state. Yeah, there are extensive teachings about this. However, we are not able to go into these details here and now. Okay. Yeah. So that's all for today. The remaining questions will be answered next time.